Welcome to the double bass drumming portion of the drumming system. Now, double bass drumming may not be for everyone, but you know what? I'm starting to find that more and more drummers are getting hip to the idea of playing ideas and exercises with the left foot on a double bass drum. So what I get a lot is I get students saying to me, I've only been playing drums 3 months. When should I buy a double pedal? My answer is, do you want a double pedal? It's something you have to want to do. If you're going to play music that doesn't require a double pedal, or if you're not into it at all, then no, my answer is no, you don't need it. If you want to be a well-rounded drummer who can play virtually most styles of music, then I would say, it's probably a good idea to have a double bass pedal in your toolbox. Now for me, when I first started playing drums in 1988, I got my standard 5-piece drum set, and it came with a really lousy pedal. And I remember coming home and having my teacher tell me that I needed to have a better pedal if I wanted to get faster. So I went and I bought a single pedal. That's all I could afford at the time. Back in those days, a double bass pedal was very, very expensive. I mean, even comparing it to prices today, it was very, very expensive to get a double pedal because they were fairly new at that time. And it was even more expensive for me to get a second bass drum and another pedal. So I just decided to stick with just the one pedal when I first started playing. Then I started listening to drummers like, Charlie Benante from Anthrax and Metallica, Lars Ulrich, and I thought, oh man, this is so cool. I'm really digging this sound of double bass drumming. I really, really enjoy this. So I started saving my pennies and I bought a double bass drum pedal. Took it into my teacher and he says, I can't help you. I don't play double bass. I'm like, oh no. So he says, well, the best thing to do is go and, do some research and try to find guys that play double bass. And I stumbled across an old Tommy Aldridge video and watched Tommy Aldridge wail away on double bass for an hour and a half. And it was fun. I sat down and I played my double bass pedal and joined some bands that were playing some double bass stuff. And it was quite a bit of fun at that time. I was really enjoying myself and really getting into the hard rock and really digging that. And it was just so much fun to actually play double bass that I was kind of almost thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to be this master double bass player someday. Then when I started getting some other gigs that didn't require double bass, I was told to keep my double bass pedal at home. I was like, oh man, but I'm getting so good at this thing. Why wouldn't I use it in the blues shuffle? Well, there's my point. There's only a time and a place that we're going to play double bass. When I was playing with some blues bands in the early 1990s, the double bass pedal stayed at home. I can recall one incident where I went to a audition for a blues band. I opened up the paper because I was really into blues and I was listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan and B.B. King and all these bands. And they said, looking for a drummer to go on tour for 2 months or whatever it was, call this number and show up at this place for the audition, So anyways, I show up at the audition and there's like 10 other drummers there waiting to get in, and I wait my turn. I go in there and the rest was history. Let me explain. I get a phone call a week later from the band leader and he says to me, you've got the gig. And I'm like, wow, this is great. I said, cool. And he goes, well, a couple of reasons. He goes, we liked your attitude. He says, you knew a whole bunch of Stevie Ray Vaughan tunes and B.B. King tunes, and you were one of the few drummers who did not bring a double pedal. Now, of course, I had to laugh at that because I thought, well, why would you take the double pedal to the blues gig? And believe it or not, sometimes that double pedal can offend and scare other musicians. And I still get that today. Sometimes when I'm on my Latin gigs, the percussionist always laughs because he says, I can't believe you brought the double pedal. But he forgets that sometimes in the drum solos, we go nuts. And when I play the double pedal stuff, he loves it. So I always have to remind him. I say, you keep laughing at me for bringing the double pedal. I don't use it in the tunes, but I use it in the solos. So rule 1, time and a place. But the practice room could be the place, Sit with it as much as you want. There's no rules in the practice room. It's just you and your drum kit. Don't let people around you saying, oh, double bass is lame, oh, it's cliche, oh, it's out of style. I found that when I started playing in the mid-90s there and I was getting more into different styles of music, I heard less and less double bass. later through the 90s and into the 2000s, now I'm hearing it back all over the place. So it definitely has gone through its changes, but now I'm finding that double bass drumming is more popular than ever. You know, drummers like Virgil Donati and Thomas Lang and Marco Miniman, these are guys who are pushing the extremes of double bass drumming. And it's so cool to watch these guys because they can just do so many amazing things with that. And if that is your goal, to play like these guys, I'd suggest that you start practicing 30 years ago. All kidding aside, there's a lot of work behind some of the stuff those guys do, and you have to appreciate the fact that a lot of practice went into what they do. And a lot of that will not happen overnight, but anything is possible. So if you want to check out some amazing double bass drumming, listen to the speed metal guys, or listen to Thomas Lang, or any of those great double bass drummers. Another question I get is, what's better, double bass pedal or two bass drums? Well, I prefer the look of two bass drums. I think there's nothing cooler in a rock band than two big, ginormous bass drums with toms all over the place. I mean, even though sometimes people label that as the 80s look, I still think it's really cool. You know, Mike Portnoy, Lars Ulrich, all these great drummers, Terry Bozzio. I mean, I think Terry Bozzio has like 6 bass drums, and it just looks so cool, you know? So if you can afford the look, awesome, go for it. The other thing about having two bass drums, though, is you really have to learn how to tune them exactly the same. And that's a tricky thing that I've found. In my earlier years of playing, I did have two bass drums, but they were different. Because I remember on the one drum set that I had, for me to purchase a second bass drum of the same quality and brand name was quite expensive. And at the time when I didn't really have much money, I was like, well, I'm going to just buy a cheaper one just so I have the look of two bass drums. The only downside to that is I could not get them to sound the same. I think one was maple and one was mahogany, so they completely sounded different. You know, the only thing they had in common is they're the same color. But the problem with that was that when I played them, instead of going do 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 do, it was like da do da do da do da do da do da do. So I couldn't really get used to that sound very much of having them completely different. I had a bit of a challenge trying to get them to sound the same. So if you are the kind of drummer who wants two bass drums, make sure you use the same drum heads, make sure you use the same beater, make sure you muffle the bass drums exactly the same, and just really make sure that everything is exactly the same, because it's going to be so tough to get a really crisp, clear sound out of two bass drums that's going to sound identical. Well, this day and age, I'm not really a van guy, and I don't have a minivan. You know, I drive a vehicle that fits all my drums, and I can pretty much get a 5 to 7. If I need to get an 8-piece kit in my car, I can do it. That's with one bass drum. With two bass drums, it's not going to happen. Unfortunately, it won't happen because I just don't have a big enough vehicle. So if you're traveling around with two bass drums, make sure you have a big enough vehicle, you know, or some friends that can help you haul your gear around. So there's no real downside to it. There's just pros and cons. And I don't like to even use the word cons because, you know, if you can do it, go for it. There's no wrong. There's definitely no wrong. I currently play in a Rush tribute band, and I play a big, massive drum set with only one bass drum, which is what I've noticed that Neil Peart's gone to. You know, many years ago he went to a single bass drum, and my setup is very similar to his when I play with R30. But I think someday I might venture into getting that second bass drum. I might have to buy a bigger car so I can get the second bass drum in there, but it's definitely a very cool look. So that's completely personal, completely up to you. Now with the double pedal, I mean, there's so many different brands in the market, that becomes a real personal preference. And there's some really, really expensive brands, and there's some really, really inexpensive brands. Well, I would make sure that you don't get something too cheap, because with the double pedal, obviously the music we're playing is going to be fairly heavy, you know, fairly hard rocking, and we're going to be moving, getting our legs into it. So you don't want something that's going to fall apart on you in 2 months. You know, many students of mine say, hey, I just saw a double pedal at the music store for $100. I'm like, a double pedal? And I go, well, yeah, maybe you might want to start at, I'm just guessing prices here, but maybe around $200 or more. I mean, I find that a lot of decent double bass pedals will start at around $300, $400, but that's just my guesstimate on that. So one thing you want to make sure of is that the tension of the springs is exactly the same on both pedals. Because if you have one that's too tight and one that's too loose, that could cause a bit of a problem for you. Now for me, when I started playing double bass again after not doing it for probably around 7 years, obviously my right foot was a lot stronger than my left. So I set up both pedals exactly the same, which kind of actually, I learned something about that because I realized my left foot and left leg wasn't as strong as my right. So my right leg had no problem pushing down the pedal, and my left leg, because it was weaker, had a problem pushing down the pedal. So I actually loosened the tension on my left pedal, just so I could get used to playing that, and I kept the right one the same. And as I developed, and just playing single stroke roll with the feet, as I started to develop the left foot a little better, I would tighten the spring a little more each week until they eventually were exactly the same. Because just like the hands, we want our feet to be exactly the same, especially if you want to be a master double bass player. It's just like having a weak left hand, and for drummers who want to have a great, rudimental technique and they want to be able to play all these fast chops around the drums, we develop the left hand or the weak hand. Or for your left-handed drummers, it's just the opposite. So same thing with the feet, is you want to make sure that your left foot gets as strong as your right, or if you're left-handed or left-footed, make sure that your right foot becomes as strong as your left foot. It's very, very important. So that's the key, is to make sure that everything starts to work in time. And as you evolve in your playing, you're going to change your technique. And that's not a bad thing. Just because one person says one thing, it doesn't mean that's the rule. I've been constantly changing my technique, my setup, my seat height, my spring tension almost every year to see what's working for me. Sometimes I'll go back to the old, sometimes I'll continue with what's new. If I find it's working, great. If I find it's not working, I'll wait a bit of time to see, is it working? Will it work more in the next few months? If I find that I'm struggling and struggling and struggling, I might find a way to make a change. One other important factor about double bass playing is your seat height. Now that's another thing that's very personal. You have to decide where you want to sit in order to make your feet play to their fullest potential. I used to sit very low and found that caused me a problem because the weight of my legs was just too much on my lower back. My lower back was constantly getting sore from playing double bass. I was getting tired, my hips were getting sore, everything was just not working. Raised my seat 6 inches, less fatigue, less pain, a little bit easier to play. Raised it up a little more, wow, even better. Raised it up more, too far. I found that I was kind of hunched over the drum set and I felt I was going to fall onto it, so I had to lower the seat a little bit. So once again, there's no real rule book of how you're going to sit down and play double bass. And it's also the positioning of the pedals. You don't want to have the pedals so far away from you that your legs have to reach for the pedals. You don't need to have the pedals so close to you and bring your bass drum in so close that your snare is basically hugging you right against the stool. It's all about being as comfortable as possible. I've got students who are 4'2", and I got one guy who's 6'8" with a size 14 feet. And you just see the different physical aspects of how they sit behind the drums. And that's something that I always watch when I'm teaching. I have 2 drum sets side by side, so I can look and see and go, okay, I can see how this guy, and I'll check their posture. I'll say, sit back a little bit, try this, raise your seat, lower that. And they look at me and they go, oh, well, you're sitting low. Hey man, I'm not 6'8" with size 14 feet. You gotta I wanna see if this is gonna work better for you. So, it's good to every now and then maybe throw a mirror up beside you, you can check your hair out while you're doing it, and make sure that everything looks comfortable. You don't want to be hunched over, you don't want to be leaning back. I see guys that are playing double bass and they're like, well, don't do that because that puts way too much strain on your back, and we don't want to start developing back problems playing drums. So all about relaxing, that's the biggest thing. If your seat's not working for you as far as height, you obviously you adjust that. But one thing that I also noticed is I've gone to almost like the motorcycle style of seat. It's a little more comfortable because something that I need to do when I'm playing double bass is really gain my balance. And if I'm playing on a round seat or a very small round seat, I feel like I'm tipping over all the time. The thing that I like to practice, and I'll get you guys to do, is simply, if you're sitting there, you don't even need to play on the drum set. You can just do this in your living room, in your bedroom, wherever. And just try to maintain some balance. And what I do is I try to get, especially the guys that are learning speed metal, is try to just play singles with your feet, and I'm not feeling like I'm going to fall over, and stretch your arms around, and see if you're falling over. If you feel like you're going to fall over, you have to find a way to adjust that. For me, changing over to this motorcycle style of seat or a bigger seat, the big butt seat we can call it, is definitely going to help my stability and make sure that I'm not falling over, I'm not losing my balance. When I went with the round seat, I was constantly tipping, it seemed. So that's the thing, it's all about comfort. And when you see some of these great metal drummers playing, why does it look so easy? It's because they're totally comfortable. That's the biggest thing, is make sure you find your, your comfort zone behind your drum set. So with that in mind, I would suggest practicing double bass with heel up, heel down, heel toe, whatever. But be patient and you'll be amazed. There's some days you're going to come to the drum set and your feet are going to be flying. There's some days you're going to come to the drum set and your feet are doing nothing for you. So don't get frustrated. Just realize that's a day of recuperation. A lot of muscles to train in our legs. So we definitely have a lot of stuff that we have to consider when we're working on double bass. So if anything, be patient and it'll come in no time at all and you'll be blazing away at double bass.